Hello everyone, from where are you watching my video, and mention your time in the comment box. Now in this video, I went into the woods alone for just 2 days. But when I came back, everything had changed. It was the summer of 2013 when I decided to take a solo camping trip deep into the Appalachian woods of North Carolina. A trip I planned more as a way to escape the noise of my collapsing life than for any kind of adventure. But I had no idea that silence could be so loud, or that being alone could feel so terrifying. I parked my old Subaru at a gravel trailhead just after noon and hiked nearly 7 miles into the thickest part of the forest, where no cell service reached, and the trees grew so tightly together that sunlight barely touched the ground. I set up my tent in a clearing I found near a creek, ate a quick meal, and tried to convince myself that the creeping unease in my chest was just leftover stress from home. But as night fell, the forest around me changed. Birds went quiet too early, the wind stopped, and it felt like the trees were holding their breath. Around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly, heart racing, unsure why, and that's when I heard it. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling my tent in the dead silence, crunching leaves underfoot like someone didn't care if I heard them or not. I held my breath, clutching the knife I kept in my sleeping bag. But the footsteps stopped directly behind me, on the opposite side of the nylon wall, and I swear I could hear breathing, low and rattling. Not quite human, but not entirely animal either. I stayed frozen for what felt like an hour, but eventually the sound stopped, and I somehow fell back asleep, more from exhaustion than comfort. The next morning I found no footprints. No sign anyone or anything had been there. But there was a small bundle of feathers and bones tied together with what looked like old sinew hanging from the nearest tree, and a line of strange symbols carved into the bark below it. I packed up and hiked out without eating or resting. But about halfway back to my car, I realized the woods were absolutely silent again. Not even the sound of bugs or birds, and worse, I kept noticing things out of place. Trees I didn't remember passing on the way in, a rusted-out truck that hadn't been there before, and at one point, I found my own boot prints from the day before veering off the trail into the woods, like I had walked somewhere in my sleep. When I finally made it to the parking lot, my car was still there, but someone, or something, had taken the time to scratch a perfect circle into the dirt around it, deep and wide, like a ritual, and stuck upright in the center of the hood was one of the same bone bundles I had found earlier. I drove straight home without stopping, but that night, when I turned off the lights to sleep, I heard the same slow footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom, and I live on the 3rd floor of a locked apartment building with no one else home. It was late October 2017 when I took a weekend trip to visit my cousin in rural Oregon, but after a last-minute change of plans, I found myself spending the night alone in a tiny rented cabin deep in the Willamette National Forest, a place so remote the owner left a paper map and flashlight in case the power went out, which should have been my first warning. The air smelled like wet moss and burnt wood, and there was an unnatural stillness all around, like the forest was waiting for something. I arrived just before dusk, and by the time I finished settling in, darkness had swallowed the trees outside completely. There was no cell signal, no Wi-Fi, and the only sounds were the creaking of the cabin and the occasional rustle of branches in the wind, or at least what I thought was the wind. Around 11 p.m., I was sitting by the fireplace when I heard 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the front door, soft, spaced out, as if whoever was knocking wasn't in a hurry. I didn't move at first, thinking maybe it was an animal or the old wood settling. But then it happened again. 3 knocks, this time louder, more forceful. I got up and peeked through the peephole, but there was nothing. No one outside, just pitch-black forest. I locked the deadbolt, backed away slowly, and tried to brush it off. But around 1 a.m., I heard the back door knob start to rattle, slowly at first, then violently, like someone was trying to get in. I froze, every hair on my body standing up, and the flashlight the cabin owner had left flickered in my hand as if reacting to the fear pulsing through me. Then came the whispering from just outside the window nearest my bed. A woman's voice, soft, almost kind. "Let me in. It's so cold out here." Over and over again, like a broken recording. But when I looked, there was no one there. Just fog on the glass, like someone had been breathing on it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the center of the cabin with every light on, clutching the fireplace poker until the sky began to lighten. When I finally stepped outside to leave, I noticed something carved into the wooden frame above the front door. Deep scratches forming a phrase I hadn't seen when I arrived. "You let me in once." My blood ran cold because I hadn't let anyone in. Or at least I didn't remember doing it. But the worst part? When I got back home 2 days later and checked my phone, I found a photo in my camera roll I never took. Me, asleep in bed at the cabin, with the timestamp reading 2:13 a.m. and just barely visible behind the curtain in the background. The faint outline of a face staring in. In the fall of 2020, during the height of lockdowns when everyone was trying to escape the suffocating walls of their homes, I agreed to house sit for a friend's remote cabin in northern Idaho, a lonely structure surrounded by miles of dense pine forest, where the nearest neighbor was over 3 miles away, and the only sound was the wind whispering through the trees like it carried secrets. I arrived on a cold, gray afternoon, expecting peace and solitude. But from the moment I stepped inside, I felt watched, like the walls themselves were aware of me. The place had no Wi-Fi, no service, and just one old landline mounted to the kitchen wall. The first night was quiet, but not peaceful. Every creak of the wooden floor, every groan of the old pipes felt amplified in the silence, and sometime around 3:17 a.m., I woke up to the sound of faint music playing from somewhere outside. I pressed my ear to the wall and realized it was an old lullaby. Slow, warped, like it was coming from a distant music box. I looked through the front window and froze. There, at the edge of the tree line, was a figure, completely still, facing the cabin, holding what looked like a small box to its chest. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared as the music stopped abruptly, and the figure turned and walked back into the woods without a sound. The next morning, I found small, childlike footprints in the frost outside the door, even though it hadn't snowed the night before. I tried to shake it off, blaming stress or my imagination, but every night after that, the same music returned, closer each time. By the fourth night, the figure was just 10 feet from my window, its face obscured by a hood, the music box cradled in hands that didn't look entirely human. Too long, too jointed. I unplugged the landline to avoid calling for help I knew wouldn't come. But that night, the phone rang anyway. 3 slow rings, then silence. When I picked it up, I only heard breathing, and then a child's voice whisper, "You shouldn't have come here alone." I left before sunrise, driving hours in silence, constantly checking the rearview mirror. I thought it was over, until 2 weeks later, back at my apartment, I got a small package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a broken music box and a note in the same childlike handwriting. "You never said goodbye.